Join us for a full day in Boston. Today we stroll through the oldest park in America, walk Boston's Freedom Trail highlighting historic landmarks and people pivotal to American independence. And Boston history doesn't end there, as we take in the experience at America's oldest ballpark. Come along and let's hit those holiday roads. We had a morning tour scheduled walking down the Freedom Trail. So prior to that, we explored some of Boston Common, founded in 1634.
He didn't spend a whole lot of time in Boston, but George Washington sure was an imposing figure in the American fight for liberty. Boston Common remembers March 5th, 1770. The Boston Massacre. There were Crispus Attucks, Samuel Maverick, James Caldwell, Samuel Gray, and Patrick Carr are memorialized forever, being shot indiscriminately by British soldiers. One of the many impetuses of American resentment toward British occupation of the colonies. The Embrace in Boston Common, depicting the embrace of where Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King met and fell in love in Boston. Dr. Martin Luther King had also spoken to Boston leaders, speaking out against racial injustice, segregation. A stunning monument to remind us of the need of unconditional love for all of humanity, as depicted through the unconditional love of Coretta Scott King and Dr. Martin Luther King. Across from Boston Common, we have the public gardens, which were dedicated and made about 200 years after Boston Common. But when you're here, always make sure that you make way for the ducklings. The famous story, make way for ducklings. Now it is near July 4th, so we have some patriotic gear, and the Boston Celtics just won the NBA championship, so they've been decorated with some Celtics gear as well. But as a tribute to Robert McCloskey, the author of the story, Make Way for Ducklings. Always neat to see these types of sculptures in the park. Boston, Massachusetts, a city that combines the modern and the historic. And right in its heart, the Massachusetts State House, constructed in 1798, replacing the old State House. Classic golden dome, a very pretty government structure in Boston, Massachusetts. Right across from the Massachusetts State House, we have a sculpture here, a very, very impressive sculpture of Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, whose 54th Regiment in the Civil War of Infantry was comprised of African American troops. A very important, symbolic, but also powerfully effective group, demonstrating the African American fight to end slavery in the Civil War. The brick walkway, the red brick walkway through Boston, marks the Freedom Trail, with different spots along the way. Highlight major events, locations, and individuals throughout the American Revolutionary period and Boston history. You could do this self-guided. You can use tours of various types from different tour companies, some of which are shorter, some are longer, some go the whole way, some go part of the way. Some tours have presenters and docents in historical revolutionary garb. Others are just features history to them.
The
Old State House.
The executive branch, which was
Held all three levels of colonial government, built
and so you'll
1713.
notice
The Franklin family plot, Benjamin not buried here, he being in Philadelphia, but this is the rest of his family, and it is so large because Boston wants everyone to know that Ben Franklin was born and raised here.
that's for the 5 guys who died in the Boston Massacre. So those are the guys who he puts them in his family plot because otherwise they were, they were like apprentices and sailors, and they would never have been able to afford this kind of real estate. But Christopher Snyder is the first person who dies in the American Revolution. Now, Sam Adams takes advantage of this. He holds a funeral for this 12-year-old. John Hancock pays for it. 2,000 people attend it, okay? And they all come here to bury him. And a week later, when the newspapers come out, everybody else has read about it, right? And then when there is an altercation, excuse me, the night of March 5th, 1770, starts out with an altercation between a British soldier and a teenager, okay? The British soldier hits the teenager, and everybody remembers what happened to Christopher Snyder, and it's like an instant flash mob, all right? And that's what happens. That's how the Boston Massacre happened.
Here in the middle of downtown Boston is the Old South Meeting House. At the time, it was the largest assembly building, and it is most famous for the site of the Boston Tea Party. The Chipotle Mexican Grill. It actually was the old corner bookshop of the publishers. Many American classics would come over here to get published. Moby Dick, House of Seven Gables, Scarlet Letter. Now it's a Chipotle here in Boston. Here is Faneuil Hall. It was generally the meeting house, but it was only when crowds got extra large that they moved it to the Old South Meeting House, like how to handle the tea in the Boston Tea Party. National Park Service Visitor Center is down inside as well. North end of Boston.
So this building behind me, the wooden structure, that's Paul Revere's house. Now, doesn't look like much, but it is the oldest building in the city of Boston. It was built in 1680. All right. So to give you an idea, our Salem witch trials in the state of Massachusetts happened in 1692. So this was already standing for a dozen years. 1775, both sides realized that they are going to have to gain that high ground in order to determine who's going to come in and out of the harbor. So where that obelisk is, the Americans are entrenched there, and the British are going to try and attack the hill from the bottom.
Many of the locations on the Freedom Trail are open for tours or interior visits, so if you'd like to explore deeper into Boston's revolutionary history, those options are definitely available. Freedom Trail tours do not include those additional stops or costs, but I couldn't recommend our tour guide enough. Her information is listed in the video description. Before heading south of Boston into Quincy for the next leg of our Revolutionary History Day, our guide gave us a fantastic recommendation for lunch. Located in Boston's North End, Pauli's is a family-run eatery renowned for its overstuffed sandwiches, fresh salads, and acclaimed lobster rolls. So, while we were recommended this by our tour guide, we definitely wanted to give it a try as well.
Very tasty lobster roll. The warm butter just soaking on into the moist bread. And the fresh flavor of the fresh lobster. Very tasty.
And for the non-seafood eaters,
How's the sandwich?
Well, we've made our way south of Boston to Quincy, and we're going to be checking out the Adams National Historic Site. John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Abigail Adams, all down here in Quincy. Now, they have their home is here, a visitor center, and then separately the birthplace of John Adams and of John Quincy Adams. Due to some transportation issues, we're not going to be able to make it on down to their birthplaces here for due to some delays on the tracks, but we can catch the old Peace Home, as they called it, before our next spot of the day. So we're heading on over to the Visitor Center, which is right across the way, right over there. The Adams National Historical Site in Quincy, Massachusetts is more than just the story of John Adams and John Quincy Adams and even Abigail Adams. It is of the entire family, and their household, all with us, with a service, public service in mind. Charles Adams himself also serving the public as in diplomatic fashions as well. John Quincy Adams returning back to the House of Representatives following his term as president, but moving all the way throughout. John Quincy Adams winning the Amistad case in the U.S. Supreme Court, helping to free those individuals from the Spanish slave trade. Charles Francis Adams successfully arguing the Alabama claims, the U.S. receiving gold from Great Britain for damages caused by the Confederate Alabama. All of these generations of Adams family working to secure freedom, to allow for freedom to thrive. This trolley here, provided by Adams National Historical Park, will take you to all sections of the property. Well, we're not going to be able to tour this one here today, but this is the birthplace of both President John Adams and John Quincy Adams, the second and sixth presidents of the United States. The old house at Peace Field, Adams National Historic Park, Quincy, Massachusetts. The Adams house. We'll check it out today. The Stone Library at the Peace Home of John Adams, John Quincy Adams, and Abigail Adams. But the presidents would never see this library. All the books in there were inside the house. And they decided later on, John Quincy decided later on to have a library built in case there was another fire. The books were too important. The old house at Peace Field. Because of the heat, the Park Service closed the house right before we were going to go in. But the rangers were able to provide additional information, show some photos, and take us inside the Stone Library. Because of the antiquity of the Stone Library and the artifacts and books inside, we're unable to take any video, but we could take pictures, and I will post them on there. All of these books were actually inside the house. Until they decided it would be best to put the books in a more fire-friendly place in case there's another fire in the house. You have to save the books. But the presidents themselves would not live to see this building. They had their own study in the house itself prior to this being built.
While John and John Quincy never saw this library, it contains the Mendy Bible, gifted to John Quincy by the slaves on the Amistad whom he helped free, and the library was the primary location where later generations of the Adams family would compile and edit the diaries of the presidents and Abigail, and the multi-volume history of the United States during the administrations of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison.
When you're in Boston and the Sox are in town, you go to Fenway Park. Red Sox playing the A's tonight, so we're going to take a good look at Fenway Park. They do offer tours of the facility, but we weren't able to do that in our short time here today. But we'll check out the Red Sox-A's game and have a good time. The underbelly of Fenway Park truly is a classic example of its time. Built in 1912. Definitely has that feel of old ballparks. Having been in old ballparks from the 20s, 30s, 40s, this definitely has very, very, very similar feel. Very different from the modern ones of today. And, as a matter of fact, Fenway Park contains the diorama construction of the ballpark. All the way through the years, the development of the fields, fitting the stadium in amongst the existing grid, the installation of the green monster, the installation of the scoreboard, Fenway Park definitely embraces its long and storied existence. Again, embracing their history, the various logos that the Boston Red Sox have held over the years. Some very much the same, other reiterations of them. The 1912 door, part of the original structure. The grandstand had ended here, and this was a side entrance. One thing I also love here at the underside of Fenway Park is the old-timey look of the location pointers here. Just letting you know we got these girders, but hey, if you can't see the sign, here's your beer and nuts, and over here's your pizza with the fingers pointing. I just love this old school feel. Again, embracing the history of the era and the ballpark. Here in the kids concourse section at Fenway Park, we have science experiments. This is a great way to introduce kids to science and to recognize the science of baseball, the science of all sports. Every sport has a lot of science built into what makes it great. But when you're able to take the fun of sport and the education of the real life science and math behind them applied, it could demonstrate how difficult these things really are for professional ball players of all types, particularly the best of the best that make it up to the major leagues. The Red Sox are famous for their long stretch of championships. The Curse of the Bambino from 1918 to 2004. That long stretch with no championships, but they've made up for it in recent years, to match, or to close to match, their very early success. So the Boston Red Sox, with 9 world championships through 2018, rank up there near the leaders in all of Major League Baseball. Fenway Park is again an icon of its time. Seating out there in the outfield are bleacher seats, and then you'll notice here in the lower bowl section, the red seats versus the blue seats. The red seats are your typical, more modern-ish seats. The blue seats here, wooden plank seats. Not the most comfortable seats, but again, a product of its time and part of the charm of America's most beloved ballpark, Fenway Park. The iconic green monster and the Sitco sign behind the left field wall. The ads on the green monster are new. The seats on the green monster are relatively new. For decades and decades, all it was a big green wall and a scoreboard. But things change with the times.
fun time exploring this historic ballpark. We had a fun time singing some songs,